We have some breaking news tonight that we're following closely. The president of Bob Jones University says he is now stepping down.
Steve Pettit announced his resignation tonight, saying he notified the board of trustees that he would leave the position May 5th. The news comes just a few months after the board re-elected him to another 3-year term. The board chairman said in a statement they overwhelmingly support the president, but they respect his decision to resign. Pettit has not said exactly why he's leaving, but released a statement saying in part, quote, "It has been one of the greatest privileges of my life to serve as the president of Bob Jones University. My memories of the wonderful people, the incredible student body, and the perpetual blessings of God will linger with me throughout the rest of my life." We are working to learn more information about that announcement, and we'll continue to bring you the latest updates as soon as we have them.